How's it going, everybody? It is 5:30 on the dot for Tuesday, September the 3rd. I'm used to doing this on Mondays. The first day of the week at work is usually on Mondays, but this week it's on Tuesday. So this is when we're getting this week's episode of Riding in Cars with Cards. This is the show where I look at points in time, whether it's current events in constructed formats or in the history of constructed formats, and just try to, use specific decks or concepts or, things we can learn from. That's what this show is about. So with the updates to the modern ban list, I didn't get to touch on it much last week. So due to that fact, I thought it would be a good idea to explore one of the cards in depth and explore specifically the deck that got it banned so that its unbanning would cause such a ripple effect in the modern format as a whole. The card I'm talking about is Stoneforge Mystic, and the deck I'm talking about is Callblade. From its era, dominating the standard format from roughly February through July of 2010. So, notably, it was only up until July because the key cards that made the deck hum, Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic, both got banned in Standard less than a few months before they were going to rotate. Did that matter? No, because over half the format was playing this deck. Well, what was it? What was it that made this deck so good? Well, first of all, it was a blue-white control deck. It was a blue-white tap-out control deck. You were really good as the game went long at winning with just a slew of powerful Magic cards. The likes of Jace the Mind Sculptor at 4 mana, Gideon Jura at 5, cards like Sun Titan if you wanted them at 6. You had Day of Judgment at 4 to reset the board. You had I know there were more. Access to cards like Martial Coup if you wanted them. There was just this litany of powerful, game-breaking Magic cards that you had access to. Every single thing you would tap out for from tap low, I should say, because after turn 6, turn 7, you weren't tapping all the way out, but you were pretty close. Previous iterations of this deck were playing cards like Wall of Omens at 2 mana, Wall of Omens, Spreading Seas. Spreading Seas was a mana disruptor and a cantrip. Wall of Omens was a blocker and a cantrip. And eventually it positioned itself as one of the natural foils to Jund before we lost all the good Jund cards, like Bloodbraid Elf, Terminate, all that. And then we went through kind of a trial and error period where essentially blue-white tap-out ended up being one of the best decks in Standard. But it was largely Boros aggro and red deck wins, and there was a mono-white deck with Quest for the Holy Relic that was trying to slam an Argentum armor into play. Pyromancer's Ascension made an appearance in Standard, both being playable and not just playable but good. There was a Bant deck that was playing Vengevine with Fauna Shaman. It was trying to mimic the Survival Madness deck without any of the Madness cards. You just played a lot of Mana Dorks instead. But ultimately, this deck rose above all of that because it was the total package. Excellent against control, excellent against mid-range, and could sideboard against aggro. That's everything you want in a deck in a Standard format. Good against 2/3 of the field, and able to sideboard for the 1/3 of the field you're not good against. Also of note, there was another deck, there was another class of deck that was viable in the Standard format, that being the Primeval Titan ramp decks. We had 2 of them. We either had Eldrazi Green that would just use a lot of mana creatures in Llanowar Elves, Arbor Elf, Elvish Mystic were all in Standard at the same time. And you would use these mana creatures to create large amounts of mana, ideally casting Primeval Titan on turn 3, which would then go get you like Eye of Ugin Eldrazi Temple, and you wanted to get like one swing out of your Primeval Titan, and then you would just start raining haymakers down on your opponent's face. Well, on balance, we also had Red-Green Valakut that was a Primeval Titan deck, and was really, really good at the time. But the ubiquity of Spreading Seas in the blue decks helped keep it in check. In particular, it was like basically the only main deck out, aside from Tectonic Edge, that Callblade even had to Valakut. The other, well, getting to take a lot more turns than them, essentially, and having the most powerful cards in Standard by a pretty substantial margin. So what was the framework of this deck like? What was it that got Stoneforge Mystic and Jace banned? Well, it all starts, even though this is a control deck, it all starts at 2 mana. And it started really back at the World Championship in the hands of Brian Kibler, who played his variant of blue-white control with only 4 copies of Squadron Hawk as creatures in his deck, which he utilized alongside Jace the Mind Sculptor, because you could use Jace, you could cast your Squadron Hawk, get 3 to your hand, and then you could get your Jace down. And what you wanted to do once you got your Jace down is you wanted to use your Squadron Hawks almost like extra fetch lands, where you could brainstorm with Jace, put 2 Squadron Hawks back, and then cast the 3rd one out of your hand. Shuffle. You cast the 3rd one out of your hand, get the 2 Hawks back, shuffle, and then Jace would be able to see 2 more fresh cards next turn. And then in addition, we also had actual fetch lands. The Zendikar block had the enemy fetch lands, so... Excuse me, sorry. Zendikar block had enemy fetch lands. That made mana and shuffling with Jace's Brainstorm really easy. And that was the first power play at 2 mana. And then somewhere along the way, they were testing that deck. They were testing specifically blue-white control with Squadron Hawks as your only creatures. And somebody came up with the idea. They said, what if we played Stoneforge Mystic in it? And Stoneforge Mystic had seen some fringe play in the winter before as part of the Naya deck, where you were playing Stoneforge Mystic to go get cards like Basilisk Collar or Behemoth Sledge to make your big Naya creatures even bigger and just like really give you a chance against John, like give you that little kid chance against John, where your creatures are just really big. You can gain back the life they're dealing with Blightning. You know, that was the most use Stoneforge Mystic had seen to that point. But what they figured out is that you not only didn't have to play a lot of creatures to make your equipment good, you also didn't have to play a lot of equipment to make Stoneforge Mystic good. Notably, most lists of Callblade early on only played 2 pieces of equipment. You played 1 Sword of Body and Mind and 1 Sword of Feast and Famine. Body and Mind was your closer. It would mill your opponent's library to pieces and make you wolf tokens to keep attacking with. Feast and Famine was basically a time walk. Now let me tell you what I mean by that. Sword of Feast and Famine, anybody who plays Modern now knows what the card does. Anybody who plays a fair amount of Commander knows what the card does. The equipped creature gets +2/+2, protection from black and green. Every time it hits your opponent, notably when it deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card and then you untap all your lands. Think about that from the perspective of a control deck. Just think about that for a minute. Think about that from the perspective of a control deck. You're getting to apply a little bit of pressure. You know, your Stoneforge Mystic with a sword on it attacks for 3. Or your Squadron Hawk with a sword on it attacks for 3. Just a little bit of pressure. It's not going to kill him quick, but it gives you a body on the board that you can protect, right? You know, let's say you flash in the sword at the end of their turn, untap on 4, equip, so that's going to take you 2 mana. Attack, get in for 3, Or maybe you equip, cast a Spreading Seas to draw a card, attack, cast Jace. After untapping your lands and then discarding a card. That's really, really good. And then you just +2 Jace right away, look at your top card, put that action spell on the bottom, I'm going to let you draw lands. Like, seems pretty good. Well, that version of the deck isn't the one that got the cards banned. The release of Batterskull is what got Stoneforge Mystic and Jace the Mind Sculptor banned in Standard and subsequently Modern for a long time. Because until Batterskull came around, aggro could beat Caw-Blade in best-of-3 matches. You had to play really tight. You had to have the right 75. You had to draw the right cards. It was probably like a 45-55 matchup. It was razor thin, really close. But it was not a matchup the Caw-Blade player felt really good about. Against like Valakut or Eldrazi Green, between Tectonic Edges, Spreading Seas, and Flash Freezes, like they could win that matchup. They had things they could board into that were really good against that deck. There wasn't really a ton you could do that was really good against the red decks at the time. Because while you're dirtling around with a Stoneforge Mystic, they're killing you. Like, Mono Red was a turn 3, turn 4 aggro deck in Standard. So if you're playing creatures and equipping swords, you're dying. That's the long and short of it. What really tipped the scale and made that deck too good was the addition of an instant speed, 2-mana, 4/4 lifelink. Because Lightning Bolt was the gold standard of standard removal at the time, and your lifelink creature didn't die to bolt. It was something you could make during the declare blocker step if they didn't kill your Stoneforge Mystic. And if they did kill your Stoneforge Mystic, that meant your Jace could come down and brainstorm and you knew they didn't have another bolt. There was one less bolt that was going to kill your Jace. Which could then find you another Batterskull, which you could then cast the next turn, and so on and so forth. It was just really hard to beat that deck in a best-of-3 with anything after that point. The only deck that really came close was Twin. Splinter Twin. We got Deceiver Exarch in the same set we got Valakut. Not Valakut, Batterskull. We got Deceiver Exarch in the same set we got Batterskull. And Splinter Twin was in Zendikar. So that was the only deck that really competed. And because of the ability, again, to sideboard into what they needed, Caw-Blade had a little bit of an advantage there. And it got to a point where people were just like splashing the Call package into their Splinter Twin decks. Because why not? You get to play both of the best decks in Standard in one. So you had a tap-out control deck. You had removal, you had card draw, you had powerful planeswalkers that could win the game on their own, left unattended. And then to supplement them, you had these really powerful 2-mana plays. Squadron Hawk would make sure you didn't run out of creatures to put swords on. Stoneforge Mystic would find you the appropriate sword. Caw-Blade largely pushed mid-range out of the format. There was no mid-range deck at the time because Caw-Blade was a predator against them. It was just a better mid-range deck than you, and it didn't even have to try really hard by playing a bunch of big, dumb green creatures. Your value creatures were at 2 mana, and then your big, dumb cards were planeswalkers that were also value cards. So, why did you need to do anything else? Pyromancer Ascension was like a defensible choice, but it was kind of clunky, and you could still get got by a good draw from Caw-Blade. Notably, especially after New Phyrexia and the printing of Sword of War and Peace, you lost a lot of your leverage in that matchup too. There was also a bit of a bleeding effect where Stoneforge Mystic plus Swords and a couple of other living weapon cards started to bleed over into other archetypes. It was really just the best thing to be doing in Standard. I, for one, played a lot of Boros with Stoneforge Mystic in it. The Boros deck wins with Stoneforge Mystic, Sword of War and Peace, Sword of Body and Mind, and Bone Horde, because my red aggro deck went through creatures really quick. So playing, a 5/5 or 6/6 creature for as little as 2 and only as much as 4 mana was appealing to me. I also didn't have the cash for Batterskull at the time, so is what it is. But what it was that made Callblade so good, if they had left Callblade alone when Modern first came into being, I have no doubt it would have been somewhere in the vicinity of like a tier 0.5 deck. Like, it's defensible to play something else, but only if you're really trying hard. Between, access to cheaper counter magic and better card selection, that's the other thing. This deck had access to Preordain. We had Preordain in Standard. Preordain. In a deck where you really want to make sure you have a power play on turn 2, you can spend turn 1 if you know your matchup, making sure you have the right cards lined up. Sometimes your matchup against aggro was a little bit suspect because you'd have to jump through some hoops. Your Stoneforge blocks a lot in that matchup. Your Hawks block a lot, and then you intend to win the game by doing something crazy like animate Celestial Colonnade and then attach a sword to it and attack for 6, and then untap your lands. Like, that's the kind of stuff you were resorting to, but it was still winning. The long and short of it is, there was no deck that was nearly as viable. And even still, in that day and age where the deck was so far and away the best thing you could be doing, we only had maybe a third of the format that was playing it. Somewhere in the neighborhood of the 33-ish%. That was it. Think about that now. If that deck was, if that exact same format happened now in this day and age with all the content, YouTube content, Twitch content, arena gameplay to just quickly dissect and boil down the format to its bare essentials that we have, it would have been emergency banned. It wouldn't have just been banned on the regular banned and restricted announcement in June after the release of New Phyrexia. It would have been emergency banned. Because there just wasn't anything better to do. And even if you extrapolate that out into the first Modern Pro Tour, where, turn 2 Infect was rampant, 12 post, not 12 post, 12 post. Because we had Cloud Post, Vesuva, and Glimmer Post in Modern initially. The Cloud Post deck was red-green for Primeval Titan and some big dumb burn spells. A Demon Fire that was uncounterable, or a Bane Fire that was uncounterable, and then Eldrazi. You Primeval Titan, go get Eye of Ugin and your 4th Locust, and then just like hard cast Emrakul the next turn, or that turn if you had an extra land untapped. Like, it was just dumb. Even in that environment where the format was pushed to its absolute limits of non-interactivity, the deck that won the Pro Tour was dubbed Catfish. It was a zoo deck that played counterspells. You can't tell me Stoneforge Mystic Jace the Mind Sculptor in that environment isn't still probably the best thing to be doing. Because you get to play all those counterspells, but you don't have to mess around by playing cards like Wild Nacatl. You don't have to mess around with an overly painful mana base to access 4 colors in your zoo deck. You just play 3 colors, have access to your bolts to keep from falling too far behind, and just win long, drawn-out games, game in, game out. The deceptive thing about Callblade, and it's something I'm a little bit ashamed to admit now, I didn't even want it to be banned. I didn't think it was so broken that it needed to be banned. because it was winning a vast majority of its matches, but it didn't win anything going away. All of its matchups were tight. So the idea was it wasn't too broken because you could only win with it reliably if you were good at Magic. Or so I thought. But then I started seeing, I started seeing some of the commentary from people that are like, I've handed the deck to somebody who'd been playing Magic for a couple of weeks, explained to them how it works. And then I played the other Gauntlet decks against it, and I still only posted like a, 55, 60% win share while my opponent was learning the deck. It's not healthy. That's what got Jace and Stoneforge banned. It was the fact that, despite the fact that it wasn't blowing anybody out, it didn't do anything flashy, it didn't do anything on the surface that just looked inherently broken. What it did was string you along for a long, drawn-out game and win. There you go. Long and short of it, the deck did one thing and one thing really, really, really well. It won games of Magic, and most notably important games of Magic. Between Jace, Preordain, some of the other card draw you might consider running in the deck, cards like Mind Spring, or cards like, sometimes you'd run a Divination or two, just to go up on cards a little bit here and there. You had the ability to have a lot of control over which cards you found. And then your 4 and 5 mana plays were really impactful, really powerful in Jace and Gideon and Day of Judgment to reset the board. And even if you reset the board, that sword's still laying there. That Batter Skull's still laying there waiting to get picked up. It was the most powerful equipment have ever been by a pretty substantial margin. And even though we just got out of a standard format a little over a year ago where we saw a banning on a deck that was roughly half the format, I don't think Temur Energy was as good in its standard format as Caw-Blade was in its. And I played Temur Energy. I won a lot of games that I didn't have any business winning with Temur Energy. So, take that however you want. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week. That's going to wrap it up for this week, everybody. Thanks for watching. This week's Homeward Path episode is going to be about ripple effects of ban list announcements. Not just the surface level stuff, but the things that change down the line. So I thought it was appropriate to look at one of the cards that just got unbanned and why it was banned for so long. That's why we did this tech. So, again, thanks for listening, watching, however it is you're consuming this. You got questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comments or send them to me. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at HomewardPathMTG. You can find me on Facebook. My name is Adam Spain. You can join the Facebook group, the Homeward Pathfinders. If you're a patron, you get access to the Discord. If you want to become a patron, you can head over to patreon.com/HomewardPathMTG. All of the content is going to be free. There will probably eventually be some patron-only content. I haven't decided what I want to do with that kind of thing yet. But, if you feel like you're getting enough out of what I'm doing, please feel free to donate. I will make sure it goes to good use. The number one thing is a better microphone. Because, this is a outdated gaming headset that I'm using right now. So, anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll catch you on Thursday evening for our trip down the Homeward Path. We're going to talk ripple effects of ban list announcements. Hope I can catch you there. We'll see you.